Hello there, my name is Duncan Cummings and this is my presentation for the UI Design for Games assignment. Today we'll be looking at my chosen game, Larian Studios' critically acclaimed Baldur's Gate 3, reviewing its user interface, and looking at what changes we'll be making to solve key user experience issues related to its pick up and play experience. We'll begin by talking a little about the game itself. Baldur's Gate 3 is a highly story-rich game with a deep and expansive world. The player is expected to inhabit the role of a person who has been abducted by squid-like monsters. They need to take into consideration a lot of story details when it comes to making difficult choices, as each decision brings with it many consequences. It's a game with a high cognitive load that demands you pay attention to the story. The sheer volume of interconnected character storylines, side quests, and things that aren't even marked on the map can make starting a new playthrough more appealing. While the game does have systems to help you remind yourself of key story details, they are difficult and confusing to navigate. Regarding the game's UI, there's nothing heuristically that suggests Baldur's Gate 3 has bad UI design. UI widgets use a consistent colour palette that contrasts well with any given background. The aesthetics present a good balance between style and substance, making good use of font sizes and styles to create a sense of visual hierarchy. The UI uses these unobtrusive liveries and flourishes to create visual intrigue, and buttons use a shade of blue that contrasts well against the muted browns, naturally guiding the player's eye. The real problem, however, comes from the systems the game uses to dispense information to the player and allow them to recall it later. As we'll explore later in this presentation, these systems are difficult to navigate if you've been playing for a while. To further explain why these issues are notable, we need to talk about the Steam Deck. As a portable console, it can change how a player engages with any given game, as someone on Steam Deck will be more inclined to play games in shorter sessions spread over the course of their day, rather than one focused play session. As of writing, Baldur's Gate 3 is a game that is not only advertised as being playable on Steam Deck, but also a must-have for Steam Deck owners and one of the most popular games for the system. While it's hard to get accurate metrics, we can estimate that 0.8% of Steam users primarily play on Steam Deck based on the number of reviews. The proposed changes will greatly benefit Steam Deck users, as the changes will help them pick up where they left off. Since there isn't currently any issue with Baldur's Gate's existing UI systems, we'll be focusing on introducing new UI functionality to fix the previously stated user experience issues. Our goal will be to make it easier for the player to follow the story of Baldur's Gate. We'll be doing this in 3 stages. Firstly, reworking the loading screen for continuing from existing save, more on that later. We'll tweak dialogue options for the player's various companions that they'll meet on their adventures to remind them of identity, goals, and views on the world. Finally, we'll improve the conversation log by introducing search and filtered functions to make recalling important information easier. The first system to be introduced is the loading screen recap slideshow. Currently, when loading the game from the main menu, you're presented with a series of gameplay hints and tips on a static image. These gameplay hints are good for reminding the player of the game's controls and more niche mechanics, so should be removed entirely. However, when you are loading the game for the first time in your play session, this system should be replaced with a recap slideshow. This idea is inspired by the Professor Layton series created by Level 5 in 2007 for the Nintendo DS. Being a puzzle game on a portable console with a similar narrative emphasis, the developers decided to implement a story so far slideshow that plays whenever you load a save. This slideshow recaps key story events leading up to where the player is in their current playthrough to help ease them back in. The idea here is to try and apply this concept to Baldur's Gate. This prototype uses still images of the game's opening cutscene and the events of the Nautiloid, with a loading throbber alongside narration for each slide layered on top. The prototype is meant to represent that while the game world is loading, the player will be taken through the events of the story right up until the point in the story the player has loaded the save at, and will continue until the game world has loaded. Some changes have also been made to the text. The font has been made larger and is now overlaid on a darker background to improve contrast and ease readability. These accessibility features already exist in the main game, so this is being proposed as a new default for players. On a similar accessibility note, all of these slides will include voiceover to help people who have disabilities that impair their ability to read, such as dyslexia or being partially sighted. It is also worth noting that this system won't replace loading screens entirely. It will only affect when the player loads the save for the first time. The existing loading screens will still appear during map changes. The second system to be revised is the conversation log. The conversation log is in a menu that's accessible from the main menu where you find the quest log. It's a list of interactions you've had with NPCs that can either be sorted by where you had the conversation, or by the in-game date you have the conversation on. The system is good because it's placed in the same menu as the quest journal, tutorials, and map, making the organisation of these menus sensible for where a player would expect to find them. The conversation log is also accessible with a single hotkey, meaning the system isn't buried behind too many menus. There are some issues with it, however. While the game tries to mitigate cognitive load by only tagging the participants of the conversation in the log, this comes at the expense of making it difficult to navigate at a glance. Shown here is a prototype for search and filter functionality for the conversation log. You are now able to search for interactions based on who you had them with and where you had them. This addition is simple and unobtrusive, and becomes more effective the further into the game you are. Finally, we have companions. When you first meet a companion and interact with them in camp, you are able to pick from a list of conversation topics. We'll use Shadowheart here as an example. You'll notice here that when you speak to Shadowheart about a topic, that topic is exhausted and you can't choose it again. Compare this with Fallout New Vegas, a game released by Obsidian Entertainment in 2011. New Vegas is a similarly story-heavy game that has a lot of companion characters that you can take with you on your travels. Interacting with companion characters, such as Rahul here, allows you to repeat dialogue options if you want a reminder. The UI will even grey out dialogue options you've already chosen in case you forget. The point here is that these two games, Baldur's Gate and New Vegas, are both titles that have a heavy story focus, so it makes sense that what works in one game should work in another. Additionally, in tabletop role-playing games, which Baldur's Gate aims to adapt, it is not unheard of to ask the Dungeon Master for a reminder what happened in the previous session, since you typically be playing once a week at most. Taking that into account, how interacting with companions in camp has been reworked to allow you to ask the character to remind you who they are. Certain dialogue options don't get removed, instead graying out, after you've had the interaction so you can view them again, and more dialogue options have been added as well. So let us review. The advantages of the proposed changes are that the reduced cognitive load will make the game more appealing for Steam Deck users, while at the same time making Baldur's Gate more accessible to people who are new to the genre. Baldur's Gate is already a game that has a high cognitive load, so any means of allowing players to remind themselves of what they are doing is a positive. The companion overhaul in particular will be easy to implement in a small patch, as it wouldn't require recording new voice lines for the characters, only recycling existing ones.